समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
After a day's break with domestic politics, we are back to the story that dominates everything right now. That is the war in the Middle East. You can call it the war on Iran or war with Iran, war in the Middle East. You can take your choice. This has had a new development, and it's a sizable development. That is the Israeli bombardment of the Iranian gas terminals, gas processing units and terminals at what is called as South Pars gas fields. South Pars gas fields, it's not an island. Initially, even I thought that this was an island. It's not an island. This is like a large extension. You can call it, some kinds of boomerangs might look like that. 9,700 square kilometers. Very large patch of land, of which about one third belongs to Iran, because it gets very close to Iran's territorial waters also. 2/3 belongs to Qatar. This is something we've talked about in the past also. This is the largest gas field in the world. Not only is it the largest gas field in the world, but if you just rank only pure gas fields in the world, this is larger. This has more gas than all the gas fields in the world put together. This is a gas field where any disruption affects the global energy markets, and we've seen already the prices have gone haywire both for crude and gas, and this has caused a lot of concern. Now what happened? Israel went and bombed the South Pars side. If you see the structure, see the map on your screen, this is how this juts out of Qatar. For Qatar, this field is called North Field or North Dome. Now these descriptions are a bit confusing, because Qatar calls it North Dome or North Field. Iran, on the other hand, calls it South Pars. These directions are relative to the countries that own the property. So for Iran, it's like south of where their other units are on ground. For Qatar, it's north of their coastline. That's why they call their share of the gas field North Field or North Dome. Iran calls it South Pars. Iran's gas field has actually got run down over time. Greatly run down, mainly because they've been under sanctions. They've not been able to bring in new technologies or new development, and that's how their production per day is very small in comparison to what Qatar produces. Also, their share of the gas is much less. As I told you earlier, the total area of this territory, which I said looks like some kinds of boomerangs like this, a bit like this, like a stretched out figure 8. Total area is 9,700 square kilometers, of which Iran has 3,700 square kilometers. Qatar has 6,000 square kilometers. Qatar's area, however, has much more gas, and I will give you some figures as we go along. The total territory has 1,800 trillion cubic feet of gas. If you want to convert cubic feet into cubic meters, the formula is on your screens. This tells you how many cubic feet is 1 cubic meter. That will give you an idea, and you can do your mental math. I'm sure most of you are better at me. In fact, all of you must be better than me at that. That's not really my core skill. The daily production from the Qatar side these days is 18.5 billion cubic feet per day, which is 52 million cubic meters per day. That accounts for 80% of all of Qatar's revenue. If this stopped, Qatar will come to a standstill. Maybe Al Jazeera will stop broadcasting as well. That's a side joke. Iran's production, however, is much less. Iran's production is almost 1/10, just a little over 1/10 of Qatar's production. This is 2 billion cubic feet or 5.7 billion cubic meters. So that is 52 million cubic meters. This is 5.7 billion cubic meters. Most of this is consumed by Iran itself because Iran needs energy. Iran is a large population. Remember, all of the GCC countries together, all the 6 GCC countries, that is starting with Oman on the south, Oman, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait. All 6 of them together have a population of just over 6 crores. Their own population. They have a lot of people from outside, including Indians, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankans, Filipinos. No, not them. Their own population is just over 6 crores, whereas Iran's population is about 9.2 crores. That population needs its own energy. That energy comes from Iran's gas fields. Now, this gas field is not all of Iran's gas. This is 36% of Iran's gas, but that is 36% of a lot of gas because Iran itself, if you add up all its gas fields, accounts for 10% of global gas reserves, recoverable gas reserves. If you look at Qatar on the other hand, just this gas field for Qatar accounts for 14% of the global recoverable natural gas reserves. That is the kind of richness that this field has. It also tells you that Qatar has been able to invest a lot more in its gas field, whereas Iran's gas field is running down. When this gas field stops supplying to Iran, Iran then can suffer electricity shortages and other problems, energy shortages. The Israelis say, if I read the Israeli press, that their idea of doing this was to cut off a revenue source for IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, because they need the money. They also need to pay salaries. They need the money to be able to continue fighting. When the Israelis did this, they said that they had done this in consultation with the Americans. On the other hand, after the attacks had been carried out and Iran started retaliating by attacking oil facilities, oil and gas facilities in Qatar and Saudi Arabia in particular, and also in Kuwait, then Trump wrote a Truth Social post where he said that America had no idea what was going on. I don't know who would be convinced by that. Nevertheless, he said that America had no idea who was doing this, that Israel was doing this. They should not have done this. The principle was not to attack energy facilities, and he told the Israelis not to do this. And he said, in all capitals as usual, once again, you can take him at his word if you choose to. I will take it with some skepticism. In all capitals, he said, no more attacks will be made by Israel. And then he goes on to say that if Iran still continues attacking energy facilities and other infrastructure among the Gulf countries, then America will carry out big attacks which will, and I quote, massively blow up the entirety of the South Pars gas field at an amount of strength and power that Iran has never seen or witnessed before. And then there is a sign of exclamation after that. So in a way, Trump has tried to bring about a truce on this energy versus energy attack. At the same time, we have a statement from Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary. He has said that US may unsanction the Iranian crude that is sitting on the seas in tankers, that is to control oil prices. So while this fighting goes on, there is some bit of give and take that's going on regarding oil prices. Also today, the shipping and the oil energy websites record that more than 90 tankers have passed Strait of Hormuz. It's possible that many of these are carrying Iranian crude, much of which is bought by the Chinese. The South Pars North Dome gas field area was spotted in 1971. But you know what? It's very expensive to prospect these gas fields or oil fields and also to exploit them. It takes a lot of investment and it takes a lot of time. After that, you may or may not get your return on investment because these are risky businesses. That's why sometimes how much energy and money you put into exploring new fields also depends on the price of crude, on the price of energy. And that is how, when the price goes up, it becomes more worth your while to invest money into many of these resources. the real investments in South Pars, North Dome started only in 1988. 1988 is an important year because that is when the Iran-Iraq war ended. And that is when first little bit of production took place, but the production really picked up about 10, 12 years later. And since then, these two gas fields have become the mainstay of global energy markets. Most of what Qatar produces is exported, some of it to Turkey, close by, a lot of it to the rest of the world, including to India. India has signed long-term LNG contracts with Qatar. Qatar has huge facilities to sort of cool down this gas, to liquefy it so it can be put in containers under pressure and shipped out in LNG tankers. All of them can come to a standstill, and if that comes to a standstill, then the global energy markets are in deep trouble. Right now, they are not producing for the simple reason that these tankers cannot get out of the Gulf because of the Strait of Hormuz blockade. But if the oil fields are also damaged, or the terminal is also damaged, which the Iranians tried to do last night, then it will create a long-term energy crisis for the world, and that's why everybody is responding the way they are. Iran's retaliation has been quite formidable. A lot of what they sent out, ballistic missiles, it looks like all the ballistic missiles were intercepted, but ballistic missile is a heavy thing. Even when it's intercepted, a lot of debris falls down and that can cause damage, and that debris is hot. It's also burning in many cases. So many of these refineries took a hit and they suffered damage, even though there was no direct ballistic missile hit. 4 ballistic missiles were intercepted over Riyadh. Those pictures were put out by the BBC last night. I was watching as well. And that's what the Saudi spokesman also said. The problem arises with drones because Iran is able to fire drones in very large numbers, and these are very effective drones. One of the drones, for example, went and hit Samref, the big refinery on Red Sea in Saudi Arabia at the port of Yanbu. That's where we told you the big pipeline goes. That means from Iran, from wherever it was launched, it was obviously not launched from the coast or it will be bombed immediately. From wherever it was launched, it would have traveled about 2,000 kilometers at the very minimum. Now, if you have drones flying in large numbers in all kinds of directions, it becomes impossible to ensure that not one will reach its target. And that's how many of these installations have been hit in Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. And UAE, of course, which has been a favorite target with the Iranians. The Qataris were concerned and scared because they're very small. The Saudis came with a bit of an emotional reaction. They said, in fact, their foreign minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, said, and I quote from him, "What little trust Saudi Arabia had built with Iran has been shattered." And then he said Saudi Arabia will do whatever to protect itself. And as a reaction to this, a big meeting has taken place. And this is a big meeting in Riyadh of Islamic countries who have a kind of a common cause. In this case, because they are rallying around Saudi Arabia, although they have many conflicts among themselves. That is something that I will talk about at some other point of time. But let me just read out the list of the countries which joined in at this meeting to condemn these Iraqi attacks. The operative word is condemn, because once I read out the list, then you will know the significance of the word condemn here. These countries listed alphabetically are Azerbaijan, imagine where it is, in Central Asia, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, then Kuwait, Lebanon, poor Lebanon, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Turkey, UAE. They condemned attacks on all GCC countries and on Turkey, which has also received some missiles which were intercepted by the Americans, and Azerbaijan, which got attacked in the very initial days, and Jordan as well. They have called these attacks deliberate ballistic missile use targeting residential areas, civil infrastructure, oil facilities, desalination plants, airports, and diplomatic missions. They've said this is completely wrong, and the countries which have been hit like this have the right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. This statement also says that the obstruction of Hormuz Strait of Hormuz, and Strait is spelled Strait, not Straight as Donald Trump spells it, or at least spelled it last night in his Truth Social post. Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz should be opened, and there should be no obstruction also at Bab el Mandab on the Red Sea, where the Red Sea comes into the Arabian Sea or Gulf of Oman. That is also part of the statement. The reason I particularly highlighted to you the word condemn is that this is probably the first time that the Pakistanis have signed a statement condemning any Iranian action. So far, Pakistan was happily, or maybe they also had a tightrope walk. Let me withdraw that happily. Pakistan was playing both sides. They were showing solidarity with Iran, my brother this, my brother that. Masoud Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, had also thanked Pakistan, but a day after that, he also thanked the Taliban government of Afghanistan for their sympathy and solidarity with Iran, where he also expressed solidarity with Afghanistan in the attacks that they were facing. That the global community, the strategic community, immediately saw as Iran distancing itself from Pakistan, and without saying it in as many words, saying that they had solidarity with Afghanistan in the attacks they were facing from Pakistan. That was the first sign that Iran was seeing through the Pakistani balancing game in the region. And now the Pakistanis have gone clearly on the Saudi side, because remember, the Pakistanis only recently made a big deal of the agreement to defend Saudi Arabia. That was an old agreement, but this time they formalized it even more, whereby it implies that the attack on one is attack on the other. And Saudi spokespersons have also been saying that we can invoke this agreement. And one of them was asked, does it mean Pakistan is a nuclear weapons power? Does it mean that nuclear weapons will be available to you? And the Saudi spokesperson said, it means what it means. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia are bound by this arrangement to come to each other's defense. That's why for the Pakistanis to sign on to a statement now condemning this is very important. Also see this, within this grouping, there are groupings. There is a grouping of GCC. Egypt is in its own place. Syria is in its own place. Lebanon has its own problems. So the statement also has a line saying Lebanon's sovereignty should be protected, because Lebanon right now is facing massive attacks from the Israelis, and large parts of Lebanon are still under the control of Hezbollah. Within this group, however, there is a subgrouping. You have the Pakistan-Saudi alliance. At the same time, you have a Pakistan-Azerbaijan-Turkey alliance, which in many ways is an alliance that is directed at India. So it is in this clutter, it is through this clutter that this one joint statement has come out, and that's why it is significant that Pakistan has signed it. This, for the Gulf countries, the Gulf Arab countries, is a moment of truth, because they had thought all this while that they were protected. One, they were protected because the Americans were there, the Western power was there, Americans had their bases. Some other Western allies of the Americans also have their bases, and they thought those bases will protect them. They had the responsibility. Second, all of these Gulf countries have bought a lot of equipment, trained their armed forces. They are small armed forces because these are small populations, but they thought that with a combination of all that, they had sufficient deterrence. Again, to cover all bases, they also continued to deal with Iran in a conciliatory way. Saudi Arabia was very conciliatory with Iran. In fact, lately, both Saudi Arabia and UAE had formally tried to reach out to Iran to normalize things. Qatar has allowed all parties to play their games in Doha. Qatar has hosted Osama bin Laden's family, his children and grandchildren in a huge compound of villas. Qatar lets Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood be headquartered there, more or less, for all practical purposes. Iranians come in and out. I told you earlier that Larijani was in Qatar just on 11th of February. Qatar thought they had all these bases covered. Similarly, or maybe slightly differently, UAE had allowed Iranian shadow banking to thrive there. So Iranian shadow tanker business, Iran's oil business could carry on, and payments were made. And they thought that will guarantee them security. All of these calculations have now failed. All of these calculations have now failed. And the truth is that barring UAE, which has defended itself quite adequately, others have struggled to defend themselves, including or especially Qatar. And that's how the game has changed completely. Now think of Qatar. It's a very tiny territory. Its population is less than 4 lakhs. Its native population. It's the richest country in the world because it sits on so much energy. 80% of its revenue is from this one gas field. So the first time Qatar was jolted out of this complacency coming from the belief that we've covered all the bases. हम हर किसी के साथ हैं, हम सबसे मिले हुए हैं, सब हमारे से मिले हुए हैं. The first time they were shaken is when the Israelis carried out an assassination raid, obviously which used Saudi airspace and Jordanian airspace, maybe both. Key Hamas figure was assassinated. In fact, a villa that housed key Hamas figures was bombed by the Israelis. And Trump also made a big pretense of how shocked he was. How could the Israelis have done it? There is no way at all the Israelis would have done it or could have done it without the Americans knowing, because Americans guard Qatar's airspace. Their biggest radars are there. There is no way anything will come into Qatar without the Americans knowing. So there was Milli Bhagat there, but Trump then pretended that he had plausible deniability. He had no idea. He also then created that drama of getting Netanyahu to call the Emir of Qatar and apologize to him on camera in front of the press. All that drama was done. And once again now, as Israel has gone and hit the South Pars gas field, Trump is again claiming plausible deniability and saying Israel should not have done it. I've told them not to do it and they will not again do it. The Arab countries are seething right now because they are helpless. They cannot defend themselves. They know that they are being led up the garden path, but they also know that they are at the American mercy because they have no other defense. Their defense is totally outsourced to the US. That's why they have to lump it. They cannot even protest. And that is the game right now that's being played out in the Middle East.